Welcome back to Season 3 of the Animal Highlight that's focused on animals and biosecurity and was extracted from the Animal Turn podcast focused on the same theme. This season has been sponsored by Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law and Ethics, A.P.P.L.E, as well as the Biosecurities and Urban Governance Research Collective. I'm joined by co-host Amanda Bunten-Walberg, who, at the time of recording, was a PhD candidate at Queen's University School of Environmental Studies. Her research explored more than human ethics in contagious contexts through the case study of bats and COVID-19. Mandy is particularly interested in how more than human ethics, critical race theory, queer theory, and biopolitical theory might guide humans towards developing more ethical relationships with animals, particularly those who are understood as diseased. In today's episode, we focus on an animal who might not be the first to come to your mind when thinking about biosecurity, but which Amanda really unpacks in great detail: bears. Hey Mandy, welcome back to the Animal Highlight.
Hi, thanks for having me back yet again.
I love it. You say it every time, and every time I'm like, of course, because you're doing a great job, and it's my pleasure to have you here. So which animals are we speaking about today?
Yeah, so today I'm highlighting the closely related brown bears of Ukraine and grizzly bears in Canada.
Oh, interesting. Are they, so they're related, closely related genetically, obviously not geographically?
Yes, and I think there's some debate over their taxonomic classification, but I believe they're both subspecies of the same species.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, and the reason I want to highlight these bears today is because today Gladys discussed how the well-being of humans and animals are really interconnected, but also how both humans and animals are harmed by human conflict. So I want to explore a bit further these dual themes in today's highlight.
Such an important topic, really, because I'd really love to do a future season actually just on animals in conflict. I think it's a really interesting and incredibly important area.
I think that would be amazing. And yeah, I'm just going to scratch the surface here today because there's so much to talk about. But yeah, I think you could really, there's a lot to unpack if you were to dedicate a full season to this. So, first, I want to consider brown bears in Ukraine. And I want to take us to March 4th of this year when 7 brown bears were evacuated from a Ukrainian animal shelter near Kiev as Russian attacks on the city began to intensify. And Bear Sanctuary Dumazur in western Ukraine offered to temporarily house these bears. And while the bears were being transported to their temporary sanctuary, they encountered road checkpoints, they encountered tank convoys and enemy shelling. Eventually, they arrived at their destination very stressed but safe. And Bear Sanctuary Dumazur's most recent intake is a brown bear named Bakhmut, who was abandoned in a war-torn region of Ukraine and was found stressed and malnourished inside his destroyed enclosure. So these circumstances are unfortunately common for domesticated or captive animals during wartime. Often, animals are abandoned by human caregivers or captors who are forced to flee from violence. And many animals, whether they're in homes, sanctuaries, zoos, farms, they're trapped in their enclosures and they're just unable to escape attacks, or they're unable to procure their own food when humans are no longer able to provide for them. So these circumstances are obviously traumatic, but knowing a little bit more about brown and grizzly bears can offer us some additional depth to our understanding of how their lives are impacted by war. So browns and grizzlies are commonly thought to be solitary. And while this is true, it's also true that they experience really rich social and emotional lives. These bears are communicative, and even when they're alone, they're capable of interacting with bears through scent marking and these other indirect means of communicating. They sometimes congregate to hunt migrating animals or to eat bountiful blooms of berries. Female browns and grizzlies raise their cubs for 3 years, which is an incredible investment of care and energy. In the Grizzly Times podcast, the brown and grizzly bear expert Charlie Russell describes them as these vibrant individuals and social beings. Russell raised and released orphaned brown bear cubs in Russia, and these cubs were curious, they were infectiously joyful and playful, and they were very resourceful. The latter is evidenced by the fact that even without their mothers to teach them, these cubs learned for themselves what to eat, what not to eat, how to find dens for winter. And in addition to raising orphaned cubs, Russell's actually served as a babysitter for cubs whose parents enlisted his help. So he befriended this particular mother brown bear who would come to his home and leave her cubs with him while she went out to then forage and hunt. An amazing relationship that's just really beautiful and sweet. Browns and grizzlies thrive when they can fully engage in their vast territories. They derive 60 to 90% of their diets from plants, and they spend roughly 16 hours a day foraging, covering stretches of up to 40 kilometers. And given all this, it's unsurprising that they have these incredible memories for where to forage for the most digestible foods, but also for when these food sources are at their most nutritious. And even though the majority of brown and grizzly diets are plant derived, they're also at the same time the world's second largest predators. So they hunt a wide variety of animals, but perhaps their most well known predator prey relationship is between them and salmon. And I imagine salmon, or pardon me, I imagine when grizzlies fish during salmon's dramatic annual migration upstream, that it must feel incredibly fulfilling for them to be able to exercise their hunting skills in this dynamic environment. So, browns and grizzlies have really meaningful social worlds and emotional lives that can be disrupted by captivity and war, and especially when these two things converge. And both captivity and war really deny bears access to their large territories that are so vital to their ways of life. So, turning from the Ukrainian brown bears, I want to now look at grizzly bears who live in what is colonially known as Canada. Now, the well being of Indigenous people, grizzly bears, and their shared lands are fundamentally intertwined. New research, which was done in collaboration between 5 First Nation groups and also some non Indigenous researchers, points to the deep enmeshment of Indigenous and grizzly lives. And what this research shows is that the central coast of British Columbia, Canada, has 3 distinct genetic groups of grizzly bears. And fascinatingly, these genetic differences actually align and map onto 3 Indigenous language families. So this really points to a context of long-standing coexistence and convergence in shared environments. And given this, these Indigenous communities have really important relationships with grizzly bears as persons, as kin, and as spiritual figures. For example, the Wukanaks people understand that grizzly bears teach humans how to live and what to eat in their shared land. They're really important teachers. They also understand that bears have a special relationship with salmon, with the forests, the waters. Grizzly bears will catch salmon and then carry the fishes into the forest where their remains will either feed other species or fertilize the trees. They're, in ecological terms, what's called a keystone species, who balance animal populations through predation, who disperse seeds and nutrients, and who till the soil. Now, often people think of Canada as a nation that's at peace, but that just simply isn't true. Ongoing settler colonialism is violence against Indigenous humans and more than humans. The scholars Tuck and Yang really brilliantly describe how in settler colonialism, settlers make Indigenous land their new home and source of capital. And this disruption of indigenous relationships to land represents a profound epistemic, ontological, and cosmological violence. And I want to add to what Tuck and Yang say by just emphasizing that this profound violence is against both indigenous humans and more than humans. Now, we see this kind of settler colonial land theft occurring in the province of British Columbia. For example, for 3 decades, the Ktunaxa Nation fought the BC government, the Supreme Court, and land developers against the proposed development of this ski resort in the sacred home of the grizzly bear spirit. So this region is critical habitat for grizzly bears, and it's also where the grizzly bear spirit was born, goes to heal, and returns to the spirit world. So it's of profound importance, this area. The well-being and importance of the grizzly bear spirit is inextricably interlinked with that of living grizzly bears. And the Ktunaxa people knew that if this sacred region was turned into a ski resort, both the grizzly bears and the grizzly bear spirit would be driven away. So, some good news. In 2019, the Ktunaxa were successful in ensuring that the sacred region was designated an Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area, or IPCA. And though they were successful in protecting their grizzly relations in this instance, I do want to emphasize that both grizzlies and Indigenous peoples continue to be harmed in Canada through land theft, deforestation, trophy hunting, ranching, and conflicts over ranching, and just broader development. So brown bears and grizzly bears are vibrant individuals who can suffer immensely from human conflict, but they also are individuals who exist within complex webs of relation. And these webs of relation themselves can be fundamentally threatened by human violence.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really love that the key takeaway there is even though they seem to be quite isolated animals that move around individually, they are really deeply connected with others. And I loved what you said at the beginning there about them sending messages via scent and smell. You know, I watched a documentary not too long ago about dogs and their sense of smell. And oh gosh, I wish I could remember where I saw it, but someone almost referred to that as their social media feed, right? Like when they're smelling, that's what they're doing. They're catching up on like the social media of what's going on. You don't need to be near the person, but this is a means of communication. And I think that's so fascinating to see. Like you might see animals alone, but it doesn't mean that they're not communicating. They're just communicating in a way we're not quite familiar with. A really nice, you know, connecting ideas of conflict and historical violence and contemporary violence with how it impacts animals, but also animal habitats, right? Like what's happening in the Ukraine, it's devastating for the people of Ukraine. It's also devastating for the environment of Ukraine. And those kinds of environmental disruptions impact both people and animals across the country. And as you rightfully showed in Canada as well, how, you know, constant kind of encroachment into habitats for a variety of reasons is impacting animals, especially animals that move such great distances, right? We think we're these massive migrators. I think the number of us who move 40 kilometers in any given day is, you know, other than those of us who maybe go and cycle and stuff. But anyway, I'm rambling as always, but that was amazing. Thank you so much for kind of bringing all those really complex threads together in thinking about bears and conflict. And, you know, I'd like to just take a spot of time to just flag, do you know Four Paws by any chance? So Four Paws, I think, has been doing some great work with bears and bear sanctuaries and interventions with regards to bears in the Ukraine. I think I'm correct that they've been quite instrumental in helping there. So yeah, I just want to flag their work here as well. And could you tell us the name of that podcast one more time? It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's called the Grizzly Times podcast. And actually, just in response to what you just said, the Bear Sanctuary de Mazur is affiliated with Four Paws International.
Ah, I see. Okay. Awesome. Well, that's cool because the next episode, I'm actually going to be speaking to Nina Jamal from Four Paws. And we're going to be talking a bit about One Health, which has come up a whole bunch in the season. So that should be really good. Mandy, thank you so much, as always, for a wonderful highlight and for your scope and sensitivity when thinking about animals.
Thank you.
Thank you to Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law and Ethics, A.P.P.L.E, as well as the Biosecurities and Urban Governance Research Collective for sponsoring Season 5 of the Animal Turn podcast, where this content was extracted from. Thank you also goes to Amanda Bunten-Walberg for being an incredible co-host, and to Rebecca Shen for doing and designing the episode and podcast artwork. This episode was edited by Christiaan Mentz and produced by myself. Just a reminder to please rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. This is The Animal Highlight with me, Claudia Hirtenfelder.